Hey there, I'm Chroma, and welcome to part 15 of making an abstract adventure. Welcome back. This time, we've made moving platforms. Also, a lot of this, which we'll get to in a second. So, going into play mode for showing off these moving platforms we have here. Now we have objects that can move back and forth between points. They can also be expanded to move to more than 3 points, basically going in a loop. Yeah, our players move with them as well, going left or right or up and down, and we have a bunch of options of how we can customize these with like speed and stuff like that. We'll get to that in a second. But as well, you may notice all of this. So basically, I've done some experimenting around, just kind of building more to our level, just to make it look cooler and have more stuff than just one platform. And we have the stuff going on over here, but yeah, so I've also recolored our ground again to, instead of being the snowy background in like nighttime almost, now we're back to like a day setting. Yeah, and then a green and green like grass and dirt or whatever that is. We've also made some trees, a lot of trees, a few different types of trees. Yes, we have like this pointy one here, this one that's all made of cubes, this one's all made of spheres, and then this dead tree one. And all of these were made using our sprites here, the circle, the square, and the triangle, and just coloring and manipulating them in different ways. Looking at our this pointy dead tree here, if I open up the prefab here. So yeah, we have a basically just a bunch of squares or the triangles all squished and pointed to make stuff like that. So yeah, we have that. As well with our environment, you may notice that up here and down here, there's different parts that are different colors. So we basically, so this sky here is what we had before with just a giant square that's a different color. Same thing, this inner part, just different squares of different colors. But then these parts here, you may notice this other image that we now have here. So we've made a white gradient sprite that's basically goes from being white to completely transparent, and that's being used here. So if I can find it, wherever that one is as an example. Yeah, so we now basically then have a separate image placed here that goes from being transparent from one sky color to the same color as the sky here, and then I use the eyedropper to like pick the exact same color for this object as the sky here. And yeah, and by having them be in exact positions, the transition looks like seamless. It's not obvious that there's a cut there. We also, at the edge of the world going down, there's just a fade to going black, so it kind of looks like a bottomless pit. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, a lot of this is just kind of floating platforms in the sky. I'd like to hope for the actual game to be, like, so when we move on to actual levels and whatnot, beyond this just prototype demo test level thing, I want it to feel like an actual world that we're in, that actually makes sense. Like, not just, you know, floating platforms in the sky, unless there's a reason for that. Like, I wanted one level that does take place in the sky, so that, in that case, I guess we could have, you know, floating platforms. But we could also use, like, the elements in the background to make it make sense. So, like, actually having, like, in another example, if we had, like, a giant tree that you're climbing, things in, like, the mid-ground being, like, branches and stuff that you're jumping on, but then you have, like, the tree in the background so it makes sense of the platforms that you're jumping between. Stuff like that as an example. But yeah, for now we just have floating platforms in the sky. Anyways, yeah, oh, also over here with this water section, we have, I've done the same thing with having a fade going into the water as well, just so that looks cooler. I've also, the collectibles that we made, just kind of put them in random places around the level, just because. Yeah. Although this level does kind of have some problems with it, with some like jumping, like some jumps being a bit too wide or too little, because I kind of just made it before testing all of it at once with an actual level that we make. There'll be a lot more work put into planning and testing. Yeah. Also, I think some camera work needs to be done with things like falling into pits, not really being able to see where you're going to land because the camera doesn't follow fast enough with how fast you fall. Yeah, stuff like that's to be worked on later. But yeah, another thing I wanted to bring up with the trees, another big reason why I made a bunch of them and strewed them across the level, is there's this fundraiser going on that you've probably seen across YouTube called Team Trees. And basically, we're trying to plant 20 million trees by 2020. I say we, not really me at all. It's like a giant collaboration of a bunch of YouTubers. Yeah, started by a YouTuber named Mr. Beast. Yeah, so I know this probably isn't going to make much of a difference, but I thought I'd just do my part because why not? I've donated a bit myself. I'd recommend that you too help the environment, and yeah, all of that. Just go to teamtrees.org, and yeah, $1 equals one tree. Trying to get to 20 million by 2020. Yeah, again, you've probably seen a bunch of videos on this. I thought I'd just put that in there because why not? Anyways, and then last thing before we get to our moving platforms is that to also help distinguish things that are in the background from things in the foreground, I noticed initially when the trees were there, it could become difficult to tell what's in the background and what's not. So I made a background filter object, which is basically I just duplicated the sky and then put it in front of everything else on the background layer, and then reduce the transparency to 75, I guess. And here's what it looked like without the that filter. Yeah, it looks kind of fine right now, but just to make sure to have it be clear of what's in the background and what's not, we just put this. I just put this filter here just yeah, so that's more clear. When we get to making actual levels and stuff, we might do more things to make it more obvious of what's in the background and what's not, because we want it to be clear and not have there be any like misconceptions of like, can I jump on this, can I not jump on this, will this kill me if I try to like jump on it and just miss and fall into a bottomless pit. Anyways, so sorry for all the rambling. If you're still here, let's go into how these moving platforms are actually being made code-wise. So click on this one as an example. So we have first this moving platform parent game object, just to sort of keep things organized. Then, and this is the actual thing that we move around for positioning the moving platform, preferably. Then we have the child object that is the sprite for the moving platform, and the box collider, and the rigid body, and the moving object script that we'll look at in just a second. And then two other objects that are the targets for what this moving object is moving between, and there can be as many as we want. So yeah. Yes, so then on our actual moving object script here, we have a speed, a delay between, that's the amount of time it's waiting between each point that it reaches, then this random offset to have some randomness with our platforms if we want it, and then a Boolean for whether or not we're going to repeat when we've hit the last target, whether we're going to loop around and go back to the first target and then continue in that loop, and then an array of targets that is references to all of these targets here. By having this parent object, it just keeps this cleaner with these all being organized. And I think I moved that. Yeah. All right. So yeah, now let's look into the code of how this is actually being done, and then how we're also getting the player to move with the platforms. Oh, one other thing as well, I've with the rigid body, we've I've made the mass as high as it can go, so that with it moving, the players can't like push the platforms as they're moving them, and then I've also freeze the rotation. Yes, because we don't want this platform rotating. Maybe we might want things that rotate. Not with this. So going to our code. First off, we have all these public variables that I've just explained, and then we have a private, well, public but hidden inspector vector to for storing the velocity. With the way that we're moving the this platform, even though it's using physics, the rigid body velocity, if you go to get that value, still comes out as 0. So we're kind of just manually calculating it to be used for the player move script. So yeah, then we have some private variables. One that is a reference sort of to the current target. It's an integer that's going to be accessing a certain target in this array, which is basically which one that we should be moving towards. Then a Boolean for whether or not we're currently moving, and then a vector 2 called last position, which is kind of the position that we were in the last frame, used for the calculating the velocity, and then a reference to the rigid body. So in awake, we're getting that reference, and then on enable, we're sort of defaulting a bunch of values. This is kind of preemptive, so that if we have something where a moving object isn't moving right away, this script is disabled on it. Then when some event happens, like us pushing a button or something like that, then we just enable the script here, and then all these values get set for the platform to start moving. So first we're setting the current target to 0, so that when we enable it, we're moving towards the first one, just making sure of that. Then moving equals, setting moving equal to true, and then setting last position equal to this current position as a default value. So then in fixed update, first we're testing if we're moving. If we're not, then we aren't moving. So yeah, if we're moving, then skipping this here. First we're going to, so if we're actually moving, how we are moving is using rigidbody.movePosition, and then plugging in vector3.move towards, and actually that can be vector. Is there a vector2.move towards function? There is, so yeah, that'd probably be better to use. So vector2.move towards using the rigidbody's position, the targets array, accessing the current target that we're trying to move towards, getting that position, and then using speed times time.delta time. The time.delta time probably isn't necessary because we're using rigid body stuff, but oh well. Anyway, so then going back up here. So we're only actually moving if we haven't reached the position of what we're moving towards. So we're having if vector3.distance from where we currently are and what we're trying to reach, the target we're trying to reach, if the distance between those positions is less than 0.1, so like we're close enough, then we are just setting the position to the target. So like we're close enough, just making sure we're exactly on the target. And then starting this coroutine called wait to move, which is going to be getting the next target if we need to do that. But we'll get to that down here. So then after we've moved, after we've moved and tested whether we should move and getting the next position, then we are calculating the velocity, basically. So first we're testing if time.delta time is not equal to 0, because we're going to be dividing by it. So we can't divide by 0, so just making sure that it's not 0. So calculating the velocity by subtracting the current position by the position in the last frame, and then dividing it by time.delta time, so that we're getting the velocity per second, basically. And then if the time.delta time is 0, then we're just setting the velocity to 0, just to, have that. Then at the end of everything, then we are setting the last position to the rigid body position, so that at the beginning of the next frame, last position is kind of the position that we were in the last frame by the time we get to the calculating the velocity. So yeah, that's how that's being done. Then moving on to the wait to move function here that we call as a coroutine. We're setting moving equal to false. Then we are waiting using yield return new wait for seconds. Then the amount of time that we're waiting is the delay between. And then to put in the random offset, we're getting then a random number between the negative of the random offset and then the positive of the random offset. So for example, if we had delay between being 1 and then we had random offset being 0.5, then we're going to get waiting for seconds 1 plus a random number between negative 0.5 and positive 0.5, which in that case would translate to waiting set for seconds somewhere between between 0.5 and 1.5. Yeah, so that's how that's being used. We might not use the random offset that often, because if we're having like a bunch of moving platforms in a row, we'd probably want them to be in sync, because it'd probably just work better that way. But this is here just to exist, I guess, because we might use it at some point. So then we are increasing the current target by 1 to get the next target, but then we want to test if the current target by increasing it is greater than targets.length -1. So if we've reached the end of the array, then we're going to want to either loop back around or stop, because if we don't want to repeat anymore. So if we the boolean to repeat is set to true, then we are setting current target to 0 to then loop back around. Otherwise, if then we're done because we've hit the last target, then we're just disabling the script because it's not being used anymore because we're not moving. And then it could be re-enabled by something else if we wanted to have it stop and then start again for some reason, in which case all this stuff would get reset anyways. So then we're setting moving equal to true. So that's then being used so that if we are not moving, none of this is going to run. So we're not going to be calling the coroutine over and over, because then that would cause problems. So also just being efficient of not running all these rigid body stuff if we don't need to, because we're not actually moving. Anyways, so that's all being done. Then this velocity is being used over in the player move. So again, we're calculating it by just subtracting the position minus the last position in the last frame, dividing by time.delta time. That's getting our velocity per second, sort of manually calculating it how the actual rigid body velocity would be calculated anyways. So then onto our player move. In order to actually move with the object, because by default, if we had it just set up like that, without the velocity stuff, then the player would just kind of slide off the moving platform as if the player wasn't moving at all. But like, so the platform will move, the player will stay put, and then we'll just fall as the moving platform moves out from beneath it. So how that's then being dealt with is over on our fixed update function of the player move. So in here, where is it? Over here. So basically we're having we're getting a reference to the moving object script. So first of all, this is kind of just like, I guess, a temporary reference to whatever moving object we just so happen to be on. So down here we now have a on collision enter and on collision exit of events. So if we enter the tag of so if we enter the tag of something with the moving tag, then we're setting the moving object variable to collision.collider.getComponent moving object. So if we've collided with a moving platform, it's going to have the tag moving, which I guess I didn't show, but that's a thing. All the moving platforms have a tag called moving on them. If that's the case, then we're just getting a reference to that. As well, one thing I also missed was just putting the same compare tag check here. Then if we're exiting the collisions of if we're exiting the collision of something that has the tag moving, then we're just getting rid of that reference. So then up here, testing if moving object, that's basically going to be testing if it's null or not. So if we have a reference to a moving object, meaning we are in contact with a moving object, then we are basically using add force with the moving object's velocity that we had before. Up here, we're then first testing if the y component of that velocity is greater than 0 or not, because if we are on a moving platform that's moving up, we don't want to be sort of adding velocity to the player pushing them up, because then that kind of pushes them off the platform. We want to just let gravity do its thing with keeping the player on the platform if it's moving up. If it's moving down, then we do want to be adding that velocity so we aren't like falling and then hitting the platform again over and over. We want to be going down with the platform as it's moving. So here we have both of these. It's like rigid body to add force, moving object dot velocity, and except this one just gets the x component but then sets the y velocity to 0. And then I'm not sure why this is, but I found that initially it wasn't really pushing the player the right amount to keep up with the platform, or is pushing it a bit too much. So dividing it by 2 for some reason made it work. I don't know why. There might just be something I was missing here, but taking that velocity and then just getting half of it made it work. That might have to do with drag, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe. I'm not sure. Anyways, but yeah, so these values worked as is. So then this pushes the player in the same way that the moving platform moves. Yeah, so all that coming together then makes us move on our platforms, and that basically covers that. I guess the rest of this I can just like show off some of the level here. So we have a lot of this. Remembering buttons. So going through all of this, basically, just a bunch of random, just putting together of a bunch of platforms and all that, including sections that we can like crouch through, stuff like that. I can switch to the sphere character as well, and then all this. I also made all of this before I made the moving platforms, so that's why they're not really used at all in this. Also, we still have this circle here that was our temporary interact thing. I forget the button to interact with it. Oh, I think I got rid of the test output thing, but yeah. there's that. And then again here as well, one problem that I've noticed with making this has also helped like sort of test whether certain ideas work well or not. When we're falling, we're kind of falling very fast, and as a result, it can be difficult to see where we're going to land. So for example, if we are up here, this is kind of a section to like meant to be wall jumped up. If we wanted to jump down, we can't really see where we're actually going to fall, and we fall so fast that the camera can't really keep up. So definitely something's going to need to be done to deal with that. Yeah, also we can see our gradients working successfully, and if we fall completely off the face of the earth, then we fall into like a black gradient, which works nice as a sort of bottomless pit. Yeah, so yeah, that's basically, I don't really need to go through all of this. I also made a thing over here, a focus target thing, as we saw, I think in like episode 2 or 3 or whatever, that this would basically make us like, this focuses on a object that I put in the middle of the level, so it'll kind of like zoom out and show the whole level. Yeah, I imagine when we make more things like moving platforms, doors, all that, I'll kind of like get rid of all this and make a new test level that has more things like moving platforms, enemies, doors, all that kind of stuff. But this is just kind of to have for now. Another thing I might potentially also do with our players is with the way that the camera is, with how the environment is, with some things being too far jump-wise or too close, all that sort of stuff. With the zoom of the camera, I'm considering potentially I could zoom in the camera a lot more like this, and then decrease the speed, the jumping, sort of play around with all the numbers again so they feel right in this space. And then I don't know if that would potentially work better. Maybe? I don't know. That's other things to be considered. But again, if you have ideas for anything, basically, yeah, just put it in the comments. Yeah, I'd love to see what you guys think of how this game is turning out so far. There's also a Discord, I think I've mentioned that, where you can also, yeah, come and suggest ideas, talk about other game dev stuff, and all of that. But anyways, that'll do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you around.